G'day, you beautiful Bomber fans. Apologies for the lack of action in the last few days. I thought I'd have a little nap after the chaotic trade period that was. But now that is all over, it is all about the draft. That is next month. We turn our attention to that because the Bombers are going to be active. We've got one of the best draft teams in the competition, the second best based on points. We're going to be very active not only in picking the best available players, but also trying to trade up the order to improve the draft hand that we've got. So this month's whiteboard is going to look a bit different. I'm going to change it up slightly. For those new to these videos, by the way, this isn't me ranking the draft as a whole. I'm simply ranking the open pool players based on how badly I want them at the Bombers. This is not a draft power ranking video, it is an Essendon power ranking video. Although this month it's less ranking and maybe more nonsensical yapping. This is a nonsensical yapping whiteboard. And speaking of nonsensical yapping, let's just get right into it. Let's kick it off. So this month, we're going to be doing it a little bit differently, like I said. Usually I throw in the top 10 names on screen and rank them. This time, I'm going to split it up a bit, and there's a reason to this. So in my eyes, and remember, this is just me, this will change person to person, but in my eyes, there are 5 players in this draft that I definitely want more than others. So I'd be surprised if my mind changes on this as well. It's only a month away. I know some of these guys are sliding down the order, but these 5 on screen, my feeling is if we get any of these 5, any one of them, I'm probably going to be a very happy man, with our draft haul. And that's not to say that there isn't talent or there aren't names later on that I like. There definitely are, and I'll talk about them. But these 5, or even in particular the top 4 here, I think everyone will agree that these 4 on screen are the ones to watch out for. So Willem Dersma, we're going to start with him. That obviously hinges on us being able to trade up the order to secure him, because this guy is going to go pick 1. I think we all understand that. He is the best in the draft, in the open pool, in the draft in general. If you gave every team in the comp the chance to pick 1 player this draft, I think all 18 would say Willem Dersma. That is the way I see it. There are players with upside, and then there are players with, this level of upside. And obviously nothing is a sure thing. Scott Gumbleton, there you go, there's an example. Dersma isn't guaranteed to be a star, but if anyone was to reach their level or ceiling and be the best in this draft crop, I would assume that Dersma would be the one to do it, and the one that could go further than the others. He could be more important to his team than others. I think about what Dersma could be in the future, and it's hard to pin down in a good way. He excelled behind the ball this year. He's proven he's a goal scorer up forward as well. He's got athleticism. He's got a good frame and height. His work on the footy makes me think almost Bontempelli, that type of midfielder in the future. He's going to take a bit longer to develop. And I think, like someone like a Dyson Sharp, who I'll talk about later, will be a better player than Dersma next year. But in 2 to 3 years' time, I reckon if all goes according to plan, Dersma probably separates himself a bit from these other names, because that's what he's doing in my eyes anyway in this draft right now. I think there's never really a world, and you guys couldn't really convince me to pick someone ahead of Dersma. That's the way I see it. So if the Bombers trade up the order, the main priority would be pick 1 for Dersma. He's an Essendon fan, by the way. After that, you've got the triple threat of Roby, Taylor, and CDT. And this is where we start thinking, okay, if pick 1 is a stretch to trade up for, if the Eagles aren't going to get rid of that, is there a world where we can convince maybe Richmond to trade away 3 and 4 so we can get 2 of these 3 players? Because if other clubs rate them where I do, Roby, Taylor, CDT, and at this stage that's not far off happening, I think at least 2 of them will go early, we probably won't have access to them. So let's start with CDT. I think he's definitely going to be gone by the time our first pick comes along. I think he's probably the second best open pool player if we're going by common consensus. The only downside really is his position and whether or not clubs or Essendon would spend an early pick on a ruck or a position that we desperately don't need reinforcements in, like the midfield or defence or forward line, or everywhere, I guess, for the Bombers. I like our ruck stocks for the future. I like Vigo Vicentini. I think he's going to be pretty good. I think Ryan is good in a dual ruck setup as well. It's really the ready-made A-grader that we're lacking right now for the ruck role, and CDT isn't ready-made. So as good as he's going to be in the future, it's guys like Roby and Taylor that I'd be prioritising just for a needs base. So even though I think CDT as a draft prospect is as bad as pretty simple way to put it, but we'll just say better. Even though I think CDT is a better draft prospect than Roby and Taylor in general, I think for the Bombers, I'm looking at Dersma, Roby, Taylor in that order. And you know, I think if we get CDT, which is a stretch, it would be because he slides to our pick. I don't think he's the type of player we trade up for. I think the three before him definitely are. I think on Roby and Taylor, you know, both teammates, Eastern Rangers, both very different players to each other. Both higher upside, and this is where I look at things a bit differently to others. So, I've got Sharp and Greaves kind of down a bit in this order, mainly because Roby is now up and about. Roby, to me, he's the same type of player, similar level to those players right now, similar position being that big-bodied contest midfielder, but he's so much more raw, and that is why he's more intriguing to me. So he only played Talent League footy 2 months out from the end of the season, and he dominated when he played it straight away. His physicality is unreal, and that is definitely something to watch out for a bit when you're looking at, draft prospects, as maybe as a potential downside, because when bigger bodies dominate teenagers, I mean, yeah, it takes away a lot of their, not development, but, it's easy for a bigger body to win the ball a lot at this level. Let's just say that. But I think there's more to Sullivan Roby than that. I see Greaves and Sharp. Those two, I definitely see criticisms about their, not about their physicality, but what else there is aside from that and what they are without it. But I think looking at the way Roby has developed in the last 2 years, he has so much room for improvement, and you can see how raw he is and how fast he's improved because of his growth spurt. So he actually grew over 15 centimeters in the last 2 years, and that's really fun because it means he was sub 180 when he was with Dandenong. He's 192 centimeters now. He was, I think, 178 or something like that when he was with Dandenong 2 years ago, playing as a smaller player. And you kind of see that every now and then. He really is a big body with a smaller footballer's brain at times. Yes, he's a brute, but he's not as broody as what he could be. So whereas someone like an Ollie Greaves or a Dyson Sharp, they've always had the muscle and they've known how to use it, Sullivan Roby has only really grown into his body, and probably still is growing a bit in the last year or so, and he has only really discovered what he can do with that ability really recently. He's definitely started to realise how powerful he can be. He probably hasn't quite reached the heights of that power, and when he does, that is going to be really fun. So for me, Sullivan Roby is number 2. I really like what I've seen from him this year. I think this is a player that we're judging him off 2 or 3 months of footy that we've seen. I've only seen him play 6 or 7 games, but it is so rare to see a player improve this quickly. And yes, you would say that eventually he will stagnate. That always happens to everyone. Otherwise, you'd have players playing into their 90s. But while he is in this rapid rate of improvement, imagine giving him an AFL, system or AFL level facilities and AFL players to learn under. He's only going to improve even more in an AFL system. Yes, he's going to stagnate eventually, but I don't think it's going to be as soon as he gets into an AFL system. So I think while he's in this rapid rate of improvement, it would be perfect to put him on an AFL club because I think he's only going to get better. So that's why he's my number 2. I'd love Roby on our list. I'd also love Xavier Taylor. This guy's great. He's a really versatile defender. He's a good size, unreal athleticism. I kind of see him like a Jordan Ridley type. He's not as good on the ball. His kicking isn't as good, but athletically he is pretty hard to beat in this draft with his frame and his athleticism. I think even though we've got a good high performance team at the club right now, we do have to think about the defenders that we have, Ridley's future and what that holds for him. And although Xavier Taylor, I don't have him pinned down to the defence. I could see him playing wing up the field, but it's something to think about with our defence and its injuries, and bringing in a Xavier Taylor, bringing in some high-end talent there to, I guess, prepare for the worst-case scenario. Maybe next year Jordan Ridley does want that move away to Brisbane, and we'd have a Xavier Taylor on the list to plan for that. Obviously, that's not the type of list management that you'd be thinking when drafting, but I think with his talent and his ability, he's probably 3rd anyway, even if we have a good defence. I think when you look at a Xavier Taylor, a Sullivan Roby, and a Willem Dersma, I think they separate themselves from what the others in their position are in this draft. I don't think there's anyone of Dersma's position really, actually, in general, but let alone as good as him. I think Sullivan Roby separates himself from Ollie Greaves, Dyson Sharp. I think Xavier Taylor is, again, like Willem Dersma, there's not really anyone like him. Maybe a Max Condagianis if you want someone late, but there's light and day between those two. I think Xavier Taylor is a freak compared to Contagianis, who I really like as well. So those three there, I'm looking at these three as the most different to those around them. So, some would have a Dyson Sharp up this high. I understand that. I do like Dyson Sharp, and I'll talk about him in a bit. But I think these three are just so much better than their peers, peers in their position. And that's why I've got them so high. There's high-end talent, there's ready-made ability, there's a lot to really like about these three players. I've spoken about Cooper Duff-Tytler, so we'll get on to number 5. This is the last one I want to talk about before we look at the rest of the game, because there's a lot to talk about in a second. Josh Lindsay. So this is probably where you're looking at kind of a needs-based player type. I considered having this as a top 4 because Josh Lindsay has slid a bit this year. He's probably more in that group of, I think there's like a 7 to 20 range in this draft, or even 7 to 25. There's a really large group of players outside the top end talent in this draft, and Josh Lindsay is in that group. I don't think he's quite close to a Xavier Taylor or a Sullivan Roby or a Willem Dersma. In fact, there are some on the next whiteboard that I'll talk about in a sec who probably have more upside than Josh Lindsay. I actually think in terms of upside, he's pretty short. But what Essendon really lack right now in the team as a whole is ball use out of defence. That's something that we've been lacking for a long time. We tried to throw Dylan Shield back there, it didn't work. We tried to throw Nick Martin back there and it didn't work. Yes, Zach Johnson coming in could definitely help that in the next few years, but it's a different type of ball use. Zach Johnson to me is kind of, I see him developing into a midfielder who's just so steady by foot. Like you can always trust him to hit a target, and that's what I like about Zach Johnson. Whereas Josh Lindsay is, he's a dagger out of defence. This is what we wanted Dylan Shield and Nick Martin to be. He probably doesn't have the explosiveness or athleticism required to be that A-grade rebounder, and that's definitely something to think about. I'd see Lindsay being more, who's a good comparison? More, Dane Zorko springs to mind, but that doesn't feel right. It's hard to think of a good comparison for Lindsay on the spot, but he's kind of like, not back half because he's a defender. He actually probably needs to improve on his defense a bit to play AFL, like with Zach Johnson. But his ball use is best suited to the back half because of how damaging it can be to tearing apart a zone. So he's an attacker by nature, an attacker with the ball, but one that is best suited out of defense. And I think that's something that the Bombers really lack, along with just clean ball use in general. Like he's almost definitely going to be available for picks 5 and 6. I'm most confident of him being there of any of these guys. But there's a world where the Bombers, pass on him for a higher upside. I get that. I'd personally like him on the list quite a lot because we need better ball users. We need better kicks of the footy, and Lindsay is the best kick in this draft. So that is my top 5. Now, those 5, if we end up with any of those, just know that I'm going to be happy. I think there's a huge chance that we get at least one of those guys. We've got pick 5, so one of them would have to be available. I'd say Xavier Taylor and Josh Lindsay will probably both be the ones available for pick 5 and 6 if there are to be 2. I would guess that Willem Dersma, CDT, and Sullivan Roby are gone, unfortunately. But yeah, if both of those guys are available, maybe not both, but after this group of 5, there is a huge group of players that I'm going to talk about. But just know that these are the guys that I would be most happy to see don the sash at Essendon. If there are to be 5 players to join the club, these are the guys, and I think this will be pretty consistent until the draft. I think these are the guys that I want at the club. And then this is where it gets tough, because on screen now, and apologies guys, there are a lot of names here. There are 16 players that I'm going to yap about. So the reason I'm putting these guys all together, because I'm finding it incredibly hard to split these guys. And this is a very common theme in this draft. There's a really good 6 or 7 players in the draft in general, club linked as well with, Yuland, Patterson, and co. After them, good luck finding a concrete order. I think the top 20 to 25 in this draft is actually strong, but after that it falls away. And that is why it is so important to not only try and get someone from that top 5 in the team that I just spoke of, but nail your picks in this range as well, because there is a lot of talent here. So we've got picks 5 and 6. It means that we're almost definitely going to be having to pick from someone on this whiteboard on screen now. Also, keep in mind we may be trying to move up the order to boost our draft hand even more. Pick 9 from Carlton, maybe pick 11 or 15 from the Suns. That would be great. There is so much value in this range of the draft. There is a reason I don't have these guys numbered. 1, because it would destroy my brain, and 2, because it really does depend on what we need at the time. I'll go through the names. Actually, let's go through the names now. So, I've got all these guys lumped together based on needs and position. So let's say we miss out on Sullivan Roby. Let's say Richmond pick him with pick 3. We would likely then turn our attention probably to a big-bodied midfielder, which is what we've been needing for a long time. And luckily, there are plenty of them. You've got Oliver Greaves, you've got Dyson Sharp. These guys are brutes. They are proper contest players. Roby's obviously my ideal choice because of upside, but these guys are being talked about very high up. In fact, there's probably a world where Dyson Sharp could be taken before a Sullivan Roby. There's every chance a club acts on either Greaves or Sharp before our picks. Probably not, but there's every chance we act on these guys too with picks 5 and 6, or one of them. So I'm personally not a huge fan of maybe either at the early stage of the draft in 5 or 6. Dyson Sharp, I like him a lot. He's in this range of players for me in the best of the rest. I wouldn't want us picking him ahead of a Josh Lindsay or a Xavier Taylor. I think there's less upside with a Dyson Sharp and Ollie Greaves type. But if we pass on a Josh Lindsay, there aren't many elite proper ball users in this draft. Whereas if we pass on a Dyson Sharp, you've got an Ollie Greaves, you've got a Sam Swadling later on. So I think there's more of a luxury for those high-end ball users right now, which is why I've got Lindsay in the last screen and these guys on this one. It's why I prefer Lindsay over Sharp and Greaves in this draft. But yeah, there's contest ball winning midfielders everywhere, not even in the draft. But you've got a Ted Closey who's the club is keen on as well. It's a position that if you don't nail, it's something that you're kind of stuck with as well, and that's what I'm a bit scared about with that type of player. A Dyson Sharp who is probably going to be more ready-made than his peers, but will he stagnate over time? I don't know. I'm not as sold on a Dyson Sharp as others. I like his leadership. I just think there's less damage and less weapons to his game than others that you see. And you go down, even a Jacob Farrow. So this is probably the other guy that I'll talk about that has that super high-end talent by foot. He's West Aussie. He's kind of a linking player between the types I was just talking about. So he's a great body and size, good by foot. So he's kind of in between, Ollie Greaves and Josh Lindsay. I think the thing with Farrow is if you haven't watched him play and you look at him on paper and his, not attributes, maybe just his base and what makes him a good player, his base is as good as anyone's in this draft. You think of a player of his size, almost 190 centimeters. He moves really well, uses the footy really well. You'd think with those attributes, you'd probably look at a top player in this draft, but there's definitely more that he has to work on than others. He probably lacks defensive intent, maybe the physicality that someone of his size could have. And the great thing about that is that if he ever finds the confidence in his body, you're looking at a draft steal. And every year this happens. Every year there's someone in the teams who just finds life easier in an AFL system and becomes more confident. Look at Murphy Reid, different type of player, but he was taken closer to the 20s, I think, than anything. And he excels in that Fremantle system. I think if anyone on this whiteboard here could do that, it is probably a Jacob Farrow. Because I think everyone kind of realizes what he could be and what he could, develop to be, but he hasn't really put it all together yet. That's the way I see it. There are definitely weaknesses to a player's game, but I think with Farrow, you're looking at potential upside rather than a weakness. I could easily see those weaknesses developing into strengths with time. You go down Harley Barker, my boy. Look, if we keep pick 21, who knows? He's definitely going to be available around the, where would he be available? He probably won't be gone before pick 15. And if we trade up the order, could get something in the teens, I'd be thrilled to get Harley Barker on the list. I love him as a player. I think he is great. I love a good natural wingman. I don't even really think I need to say more. I've yapped on enough about Harley Barker this year. We move on to the next few guys, and this is where you change it up a bit, and this is where you're going to have fans disagreeing on what the Bombers need. So, and this is a good question, actually, down in the comments. Do you think the Bombers need a high-end contest midfielder like an Ollie Greaves or a Dyson Sharp, or do we need that smaller, athletic, fast, speedy, line-breaking midfielder like a Sam Cumming, a Sam Grill, a Jevon Philippou? These guys, they're smaller in size, but they are quick, they're athletic, they're aggressive on the footy, they move it forward at all costs. I think the setback with a few of these is maybe a lack of polish, or in the case of a Philippou, maybe a bit more of an unknown. As I've said before, I think he's maybe a year behind on his development. I kind of see the way he plays, and I see a guy who looks like he's shaping up to have a massive draft year next year, and part of that is because of his injury. He obviously missed some important games, but I think Philippou also has the upside that others here don't. Grill, this one might confuse some, but I see a lot of Elijah Sardas in Sam Grill. Like, when Sardas was drafted, we all saw him as this fast and dynamic and slick midfielder and thought that his foot skills could develop over time. And that is so weird to think about. I think we look at Sardas now and we look at him in his draft year. It's almost like they're different players, like completely different players. And I don't think that's on Sardas. That has to be on the development a little bit. I think our development's come a long way with certain types of players, and you've seen that with others that we've drafted. Elijah Sardas is someone who's really struggled in our system, and that's why I've always thought that maybe a move is best for him, or maybe he just gets the extra year and tries to develop with that. But I don't know. I think Sam Grill could be a Jet. It's just, and it's not really fair for me to judge players now on others that we've taken in the past, but I'm just a bit worried and about the club being burnt again by a player that we drafted in a similar range. That's if we take him with 5 or 6, because that's where we took Elijah Sardas. I'd be pretty scared of us taking him early. Maybe with a teens pick, maybe not with those early ones. I'd rather something different there. But with a pick in the teens, if he's available, Sam Grill. And then you've got Sam Cumming. I probably like him the most of these three. I really like him a lot. I think he's got a bit of grunt to him, which is good. He's got a good attitude. He'd be a good culture driver. If we're doing a top 10 whiteboard, and I've done this quite a few times, Sam Cumming is in it. He's usually been after that, in that 5 to 9 range. You go down to the right side, Oscar Taylor. This is a guy that I think we'd be looking at for a pick in the teens if we get one. He wouldn't be in that early range. It's not really a needs basis. Oh, maybe it is a needs basis. We do still need some spark out of the back half. I talked about Josh Lindsay being, more that stable kick. He's someone that would open up a zone after a mark. Oscar Taylor, to me, is a pure rebounder who moves with the footy. And I think the thing to note with rebounding defenders is that they can always transition into something different. I wish I had some names prepared to show that, but you can look at countless rebounding defenders over the years. I'm sure you can, and many of them would now be midfielders or maybe forwards, maybe wingmen. It's a really malleable style of player to be a rebounding defender who, you naturally possess drive and pace, usually good ball use at this age. Taylor's good by foot. He's not amazing, but he's good. But the way he moves, it's hard to stop him at times. He's line breaking, and I think that's perfect for a midfielder or a wingman, that type of player. So, although it's almost a needs basis thing because we do lack some good spark out of the back half, I don't think Taylor's locked down to defence, much like Angus Clark, actually. Clark was a defender in his draft year, and now we don't really know where he's going to be when he ends up his footy career. We don't know what his best position is, and that's a really fun thing about them. And I get that vibe with Oscar Taylor. He's the type who's going to start his career in defence and move the footy forwards from there, and then could easily move, up the ground in his position. Speaking of forward, I guess we weren't speaking of forward, but we're going to speak of forward now. Lockie Doveston. So I think this is the big one to watch that the Dons will be thinking most about. And this ties into our academy. So if the Dons have another pick around the teens, let's say pick 11, do we use it on Lockie Doveston and pass on one of our NGA boys? And that is the big question. I think Doveston he's better than Adam Swade. He's better than Hussein Al-Achkar. I think if he's available for one of our picks and we've already gotten others early, maybe we do. Maybe we pass on Hussein. I like him a lot. He's a really crafty player, but Doveston is the best small forward in the draft, and that is definitely a zone and an area of the field that we do need to improve as a club. We've been trying to do it. We brought in Oscar Smart. That didn't work. I think if we go into 2026 with picks 5 and 6 being used on high-end players, and then we trade up for a Lockie Doveston to pair him with Kako, that would be very exciting. Of course, that is just one position, and the same could be said about an Oscar Taylor in defence or a Sam Grill or anyone I've just spoken about. But it goes to show the evenness of this range of the draft, but also what the club is thinking right now about what the best way forward is. Because there's a lot that the club needs to work on in terms of what zones we need to improve the most. And maybe Lockie Doveston is an answer for that. And another one you've got is a Mitch Marsh. So this is one of the very best talents in the draft, someone that the club could definitely be looking at, even though we've got players of his style. We've got we've got Kyle Langford, we've got Nate Caddy, we've got Liam McMahon, those smaller key forwards. But Mitch Marsh is, the upside is there. He's got real athleticism and craft. It'd be a bit like with Nate Caddy, that similar type of player where it's a hard matchup more than anything, and then they can use that athleticism and craft to really dominate because of that tricky matchup. You can't have someone too tall because he's too athletic on the ground. Can't have someone too small because he's actually good in the air. There's less upside than there is with Caddy, but if anything, I think it could unlock both of them to be a bit more versatile as players. I could see where could Marsh may Marsh could play on the wing. Caddy, I've said for a while he can play in the guts. He's trained there before, so maybe that would be the thinking with a Mitch Marsh, or maybe you go down the route of an Aiden Schubert and a Louis Emmett. If I'm being honest, Louis Emmett is mostly here for me to try and make the visuals a bit more pleasing. It's an OCD thing. I had 15 names before. I didn't want it to be lopsided, so I put in a 16th, and I thought Emmett was the next best after that. Look, I think if we keep a pick in the 20s and Emmett's there, maybe, but if we're looking at a big ruck forward, Schubert is the one to look for. There's CDT, after him, Aiden Schubert, and I really love Aiden Schubert. He, maybe not as much for what we're building, but if we're available, it could well be a best available type thing, and it's definitely something that, if we think about what we need now as a club, we don't need a 2-meter forward. We've got Peter Wright, but in 2 to 3 years, Aiden Schubert could develop into a really important player. It's just tough to really justify drafting another key forward after keeping May and McMahon and Edwards and everyone we've got. I still think keeping McMahon was maybe a 50-50 choice at best. It's left us with limited flexibility, but Schubert at least has ruck in his arsenal, and with a 23-man bench, you've got the dual ruck setup, which is going to be important in the next few years. You can already see clubs going down that road. I think that's going to be how most clubs use the bench spot, with an extra ruckman, one that can move. So yeah, we move on, and to close out the whiteboard, this is a guy I really like. This is a new name that's emerged on this channel. I've spoken about him on AFL 101. He's in my top 20 power rankings open, but I think Blake Threadgold, if we can get another pick in the teens, this is the bloke to keep a massive eye on. He is a key defender. He's a pure key defender out of Sturt. He was incredible to end the year for Sturt. He missed most of champs for SA with an injury. I think he made 1 or 2 games maybe. But having watched a lot of Sturt this year for my boy Harley Barker, Blake Threadgold is a guy who always impressed me every time I watched him, especially in that grand final. He was the best on ground. He took, I think, 4 million intercept marks in the one game. I'll be putting out quite a few positional videos based on, highlighting what players I think the Bombers could take for each position, and I think that's an easier way to look at it than just a whiteboard. But Blake Threadgold is one of the very best key defenders to come out of the draft in how many years? The last few years. I think he'd be top 10 since 2020 for key defenders, and that's just me purely thinking about it without thinking about it. And he's probably the best pure key defender in this year's draft, aside from Harry Dean, who's tied to Carlton. So I think that's interesting because it's a position that we need to bolster. Threadgold is a player that you can justify using a pick on in the teens. He's a very exciting player. I like him a lot. And also, for those who know him, I cannot unsee this. He does look a lot like Kai Havertz from Arsenal. I know that there are a few Arsenal fans in the comments. Hello, my fellow Gooners, but I see Kai Havertz. Every time I see Blake Threadgold, I see Kai Havertz. But anyway, back to what we're talking about. So if we're looking at the names on screen here and the last 5 that I spoke of to start, Dersma, CDT, Roby, Taylor, Lindsay, I think it's almost a given that we take 1 from the first screen and probably 2 from this one. I think the Bombers are going to enter the draft with 3 first-round picks that we'll use, and then probably use the other 2 list spots on the NGA duo. So we think if one of those players before slides through, who would it be? Would it be a Josh Lindsay? Probably. Would it be a Xavier Taylor? Maybe. I think he's most likely of those really high-end 4 players that I like to slide through. And if we take a Xavier Taylor in the draft, who do we prioritize after that? And that's why this screen is really, it's not numbered, because it really depends on what we take with one of those early picks. If we take a Sullivan Roby, I don't even think we're going to consider drafting a Dyson Sharp or an Ollie Greaves. I'm always going to like Josh Lindsay as a bridging piece. I don't think there's a world where we can't draft Josh Lindsay. I think his ball use is too good to pass on, and in a draft really lacking in ball use, Josh Lindsay always stands out to me. I think there's always room for a contest mid, so Greaves or Sharp or Roby. I wouldn't be surprised if one of those guys is at the club next year. Maybe even Sam Cumming for a bit extra, Grill for speed, Philippou for upside, Doveston if we want to keep improving that small forward zone, Marshall Schubert if we want height. There's so much you can draft in this year. Don't even think I talked about Hibbins Hargraves. I think I skipped over him, but he's another who really isn't defined by one position. He's just a forward half hybrid type player. And that's the really fun thing about this draft. There really isn't much consistency to it at all. There isn't heaps of high-end talent, but there is so much good talent in this range to choose from different roles and positions and styles of player. I don't think we're going to leave the draft disappointed. The more I think about the year, and at the start of the year, I was hoping our picks would be as early as possible to combat the lack of proper high-end players in this draft. But as time has gone on, we've seen Roby and Taylor rise. It's shown us that it's a really solid and good draft to be involved in early. So for us to most likely be having 3 players in the first round, I think that's a massive bonus for an already young list. And it kind of shows you why we rejected that merit trade. They really just didn't give us what we wanted. We didn't need more early picks. We probably didn't have the list spot for more early picks anyway. I think if you need to take anything out from this video, I'd say we don't have a clue who we're going to take in the draft. It is still so up in the air, but also we're not short of options. The next time I do this next month, I might do a proper ranking right before the draft to show you guys, put out maybe a full open draft power ranking so you guys know where I see our eventual draftees compared to other teams maybe. But the way I see it, I think it's so even. It's going to be really hard to end or to leave this draft disappointed. Ideally we're taking some really high-end players, but I think if we don't, there's a lot to really like about this draft. But that is all. Cheers for watching, guys. Cheers for watching, Bomber fans. Like if you enjoyed. It's good to be talking to you again. It feels like I know it's only been 2 or 3 days, but it does feel like it's been a while. So yeah, cheers for watching. Like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. And as always, go Bombers.